Within this remote Central African forest lives a great ape. It's our closest living relative. Yet to many, it's a complete stranger. It's the bonobo. Bonobos were thought to be just pygmy versions of the chimpanzee. They do look a bit like a chimp, but they're a completely different species. Where chimpanzees fight and murder, bonobos are peacemakers. Bonobo means ancestor, and this animal could give us new insights into our own background, in particular where we get our gentler side. But just as we were learning more about them, their homeland, the Congo, plunged into civil strife. The peaceable bonobo may also have become a casualty of war. Researchers are now struggling to trace them. Have we lost the chance to get to know this intriguing and forgotten member of our family? The only way to reach the forests where bonobos live is along the tributaries of the Congo River. This has always been an unpredictable place to travel. Even now, the journey can take many days. As the river snakes into the heart of Africa, it's easy to feel you're going back in time. These are some of the oldest and richest rainforests in the world. The water doesn't stop at the bank. Swamp forest stretches back from the river margin for over half a mile. A tough place to get around, unless you live up in the canopy. Animals like colobus monkeys can be found right through this region. But it's only within a single bend of the Congo River that bonobos can be found. This area of forest is like a time capsule. Bonobos have existed here in much the same way for the last 5 million years. These deeply intelligent apes seem very relaxed. They take afternoon naps, are highly social, and develop lifelong friendships. In many ways, they remind us of ourselves. Mothering is important, and childhood lasts many years, a crucial time when bonobos learn about the world. It's hardly surprising they strike a chord. We humans share a common ancestor with both bonobos and chimpanzees. Between 5 and 7 million years ago, we all began to go our separate ways. But only the bonobo continued to live just in these humid forests where it evolved. In evolutionary terms, 5 million years isn't long at all. Bonobos still share over 98% of our DNA, the same as chimps. They may be able to tell us much about our distant past. But because bonobos were assumed to be just like chimps, no one bothered to study them until the mid-1970s. Even then, the Congo was politically unstable. This was a dangerous place to study animals. Only a handful of scientists, such as Jeff Dupin, have risked living here. It takes resilience too. Finding bonobos in this forest is notoriously difficult. In forests such as Lomako and Wamba, it took years to gain the trust of these shy animals before scientists could even begin taking notes. Bonobos spend far more time in the canopy than chimps, and there were far fewer of them, perhaps only 20,000. So for the small number of researchers who followed them, unlocking their secrets proved slow and arduous. Hidden away in this remote patch of forest, the bonobo remained a largely forgotten ape. Above all, they were overlooked because our other cousin stole all the limelight. What really grabbed attention was the excitable and violent nature of the more common chimpanzee. Male chimps spend their lives making and breaking friendships. We readily identified with their political maneuverings. But the Machiavellian way they jockey for power wasn't the only thing we latched onto. More shockingly, we saw them crossing into next-door territory, hunting down and killing their neighbours. Chimpanzees committed murder. And yet, when different bonobo troops meet, the outcome is not war, but peace. At Wamba Forest, a team of researchers led by Japanese scientists watched bonobos over a 20-year period. What happened when different groups of bonobos met was a total revelation.
We have not observed any case of intergroup killing. So in Wamba, there are 5-6 groups of bonobos, and then they sometimes encounter. And the males become very excited, and then they form a front line. This side is this group, and the other side is the other group, and they continue displaying shaking branch or something like that.
The male bonobos posture at each other from either side of the boundary line. But the females take a very different course of action. They all get together.
So females start merging, and then start grooming with each other, and then eat with each other, and then finally males give up. Then, in most extreme case, two completely different groups merge completely, and then they move together for a week or more.
This was extraordinary. We had seen the roots of our warfare and aggression in chimps, and yet here was our equally close cousin keeping the peace and getting on with the neighbours. Good bonobos give us an insight into a quite different side of our nature.
If you look at human society, it's of course very easy to compare our warfare and territoriality with the chimpanzees. But that's only one side of what we do. We also trade, we intermarry, we allow each other to travel through our territory to some other place. There's an enormous amount of cooperation, and actually among hunter-gatherers, peace is much more the common activity 90% of the time, and war is only a small part of the time. And about the peaceful relations, chimps cannot tell us anything, because chimps have only different degrees of hostility between communities. Whereas bonobos do tell us something. They do tell us about the possibility of having peaceful relationships.
But getting further insights into this peaceful side of the bonobo's nature was itself threatened by war. In 1994, genocide in neighbouring Rwanda began to destabilise the whole of Central Africa. Extremist Hutu militias, responsible for the slaughter of nearly 1 million people, were pursued into the jungles of the Congo. These remote forests had become an even more volatile place to live. Bonobos had survived for 5 million years in their forest enclave. Would they be able to make it through the next 10? Would we have time to work out how these close relatives live peacefully together? Researchers hung on in the forests despite the mounting political turmoil around them. By the mid-1990s, bonobo research was still in its infancy, but already scientists were astounded by just how different they were from chimps, right down to their personality.
I met them the first time, and I saw them at a zoo in Holland, and I thought immediately, they're totally different. The sense that you get looking them in the eyes is that they're more sensitive, more sensual, not necessarily more intelligent, but there's a higher emotional awareness, so to speak, of each other and also of people who look at them.
As researchers got to know their subjects better, there were even bigger surprises. It was assumed that all great apes fit into hierarchies dominated by males. Not here. In bonobo society, females are in charge. Although males and females search for food together, females decide how it's shared out. A fallen bolingo fruit is a favourite. But it's the females who get to feed first. Male chimps wouldn't tolerate that, but male bonobos have to wait their turn. The females often share food with each other. It's a crucial way of strengthening their sisterhood. The males might want to muscle in, but if the females stand united, the males remain under their collective thumb. Individually, a male bonobo is stronger than a female, and from time to time, testosterone gets the better of them. But shows of strength remain just that. Mostly, they're ignored. Male bonobos are also kept in check because they don't rely on each other for support. They lack the powerful alliances which give male chimps the upper hand. A male bonobo remains by his mother's side for much of his life.
Sons of very high-ranking females get a very high social status. It was like a Japanese old society. And they are always depending on their mother. Even if they are fully grown adult males, they are still following their old mother and ask for her help until their mother dies. And then when their mother dies, their social status will go down because they have no supporters anymore.
Sometimes this happens at a very young age. When this bonobo was 3 years old, his mother died. Since then, he's had no influence within the group. But he can still play with the other youngsters. During some particularly boisterous play, his friend's mother wades in. Another bonobo breaks up the fight, but the mother has bitten the orphan on the hand. His playmate takes a great deal of interest in his damaged hand. The orphan may be chastened, but at least the group still accepts him. In chimp society, he'd be lucky to still be alive. But the incident reveals even more about Bonobo's kindly nature, especially when other infants come to see what the matter is. Their care for the orphan is touching. These scenes are remarkable. The youngsters really do seem to sympathize with his problems. Putting yourself in someone else's shoes makes us and bonobos more tolerant. Perhaps here is a glimpse of a behavior rooted in our shared past. Even more remarkably, bonobos don't just look after each other. They can help other creatures too.
There was a bonobo at a zoo in England who found a little bird, a starling, that had hit the window at the zoo. And the starling was stunned, and she picked it up. She took it in her hand, and she climbed to the highest point of her enclosure, the highest tree. And she wrapped her feet across the tree so that she had her hands free. And she unfolded the bird like this, like a little toy airplane. She sent it out, which I think is amazing because it means that, of course, not something she could do to a bonobo. That would be stupid to do that. But for a bird, that seems to be the appropriate help.
For a long time, people argued that such noble traits belong to humans alone. But these animals show that kindness and empathy are not only the property of man. Human history, particularly in Africa, has often been defined by conflict. And during 1997, Congo was reaching crisis point. Rebel forces marched on the capital Kinshasa and deposed President Mobutu. Eventually, a fragile peace was brokered. Congo's conflict showed the worst of human nature, greed and the hunger for power driving men to war. Bonobos also have disputes, and during the Congo's window of peace, researchers watched the unorthodox way in which they avoid violence. Through sex. Most animals, even chimps, have only a few days each month when females are sexually active. Bonobo females have sex all through their cycle, even when there's no chance of getting pregnant. Like humans, bonobo sex isn't just about having babies. What is different is that sex has spilled over into most areas of bonobo life.
In the bonobos, the sex is really permeates everything they do. It is a greeting, it is a reconciliation, it is a mother-child bonding thing, it is a female bonding thing. And so sex has a lot of social functions that it has taken on. And that's also why it is used in all possible combinations, not just male to female, because the sex has a wider social function.
A bit like a handshake or a hug, it lasts only a few seconds.
The sex of the bonobo is very casual, very quick, and they do it not the whole day, but people sometimes think. But that's the human perception. But if 8 times 10 seconds, it's not so much.
But these brief sexual contacts have an enormous impact on the overall calmness of bonobo life. Intimacy makes it hard to stay angry. Bonobo disputes might begin aggressively, but sex can smooth tensions, even in mid-charge. Bonobos, with their matriarchies, their altruism, and especially their tolerance towards different communities, appear to turn long-cherished ideas about apes upside down. They also raise fascinating questions about our own background.
Imagine that we didn't know the chimpanzee, that all we knew was these bonobos who had sex all the time and were peaceful and female-dominated, and that people would say, this is the only close relative that we have. I think we would have totally different theories about ourselves and our background, but of course it didn't happen that way. We actually ended up knowing the chimpanzee first.
By focusing so much on chimps, we lost valuable time in understanding the bonobo, and there were still many pieces of the puzzle to solve. But the chance to find out any more about them was suddenly snatched away. The fragile peace in the Congo had turned out to be just a few months of borrowed time. In 1998, deep tensions surfaced again. Neighbouring countries lined up behind different factions. The Congo plunged into a bitter and protracted civil war. The next 4 years of fighting would bring the country to its knees. Most of the casualties were civilians. Remote communities abandoned their crops and fled as the war spilled deep into the jungle. Now even bonobo researchers came under suspicion.
Soldiers came to our campsite to arrest us because there was a general belief that we were spies for the enemy. And so they showed up, about 10 of them. They showed up at the campsite, they arrested us. They found, of course, that we were walking in the forest with walkie-talkies. We had a set phone, we had radiophony, so that was enough proof. But these soldiers said, I mean, in Basanko, everybody was, it's a bit crazy idea that while war is going on, that some naive white people are running after bonobos in the forest. I mean, this normally you don't do. If there are diamonds or gold, yes. So they were coming to look for the diamonds first. When they didn't find the diamonds, they decided that then we are spies.
The scientists were forced out. More than 20 years' worth of continuous observations, a valuable record of individual bonobo lives, came to an end. There was chaos as thousands of people were displaced from their homes. By 2001, over 3 million people had died, most of them from disease and starvation. In desperation, many people turned to the forest for food. Weapons had flooded into the country, and all animals, bonobos included, were threatened. Bonobos call loudly to each other when they bed down for the night, and this would have made them an easy target. Those in study sites were most vulnerable, as they had learned to trust humans. Their forest refuge was under siege. Our close cousin was in deep trouble. But no one knew what was happening to them while the war dragged on. The forest remained no-go areas. Jeff Dupin stayed in the Congo, trying to keep tabs on the bonobos in his old study area, the Lomako forest. The forest itself was too dangerous. The only way he could do his job was by checking out what kind of meat was being brought to the market.
And we did a study on the market here in Basankusu, and every day the market was visited by local assistants and recorded for 12 months about 12,000 carcasses of meat at the market here in Basankusu. 35% of which came from Lomako forest, which indicates the importance of Lomako forest for the animal proteins here in Basankusu.
In a starving country, the forest animals were destined for the pot.
For many people, bushmeat, including monkeys and bonobos, is a normal part of their diet. You prepare it in some palm oil with some onions, some potato, some tomato, and some piment. Whether it's a duck or a forest pig or a bonobo, it's most of the time prepared in the same way. Meat is meat. Meat is meat.
As the war progressed, an army of professional poachers took more and more meat from the forest. There was no one to stop the slaughter. Except for these men. The guards at Salonga National Park had 2,000 miles of rivers to patrol, but they had no training and often received no wages. They didn't even have an outboard motor. They were completely outgunned.
There were 10 of them and only 3 of us. They shot my arm. Now it doesn't work.
The poachers shot me through the lung. I spent the night in the water before my friends found me. I thought I was going to die.
During the war, 250 Congolese park wardens lost their lives. The rivers snake 1,000 miles from the deepest jungle to the heart of the capital, Kinshasa. Boats carried shipments of bushmeat for a city flooded with starving refugees. But they had another cargo. Live animals for the pet trade. For each baby bonobo, an entire family had probably been slaughtered. This baby's been rescued from the market and will be taken to an orphanage in Kinshasa. Most babies are terrified and malnourished when they arrive. A team of surrogate mothers give them food, medicine, and the love and attention they'd normally get from their own mothers.
La banane, c'est bon, ça goûte. Oui.
During the war, the number of babies arriving at the orphanage spiraled. there were reports that bonobos were facing extinction. We'd barely got to know this family member. Now there was a possibility we'd never meet a wild bonobo again. The forests remained too dangerous to survey until 2003, when an uneasy peace returned to parts of the Congo. Relief for millions of people who'd endured terrifying times. Now it was possible to find out what lay behind the headlines. It did not look good.
And we just went to look what the situation was on the bonobos in our former study site. And at that moment, the results were really discouraging. We spent a number of days in the forest, didn't find traces of bonobos. Overall, at that moment, we had quite a pessimistic feeling on the bonobos.
The forests seemed empty. The gentle ape was missing. For one researcher, it was time to find out what had happened to them. Francis White pioneered the work on bonobos in the Lomako forest before the war. This is her first journey back. She's returning to her old study site to see whether there's any chance of resuming her work. What, if anything, will she find? This once familiar river trip is now a journey into the unknown.
But once we get out of the boat and head into the forest, that's when we'll really know whether there's been a big change. If we walk into the study site, do we see lots of monkeys? Do we see all the species of monkeys we're used to seeing? And how many groups are there in the study area? And then, of course, the big question is how the bonobos are doing.
Frances is also worried about the fate of her local colleague, Papa Bosco, whose family remained in the area throughout the terrible years of the war. The first signs are hopeful as Frances arrives at the small community which supported her before the war.
Bosco! It's Bosco!
Bosco is alive. Frances has brought gifts of salt, a precious commodity that was impossible to get here during the war. The villagers have suffered terribly.
I ran into the forest with my family to hide from the soldiers who were hunting me. If they had found me, I would be dead now. It makes me cry to remember many children died because they could not survive in the forest.
Now the villagers hope life can return to normal. A new bonobo study would bring sorely needed cash to the village. But are there any animals left? Frances heads straight into the forest.
So when you see broken branches, especially large branches, start checking it out for a nest there.
They're looking for any signs that bonobos are still using the area.
Now, there's something on there. Hang on. I want to get my feet wet whilst I am. I like finding fingerprints when I can find them, or knuckle prints. In hot days like this, they'll come down into the stream and make knuckle prints.
There are no knuckle prints, but there is hope further down the trail.
It's a plant that the bonobos have eaten, and they open it up to get the pith out from the middle so that you can eat the inside as a sort of like a celery kind of thing. But as it's been opened today, and it's only the bonobos that eat this on the ground. So there was at least one bonobo here today. They're in this area somewhere, which is very exciting. We just saw that one sign, the Bokombe vine that had just been eaten. That was very fresh, had not gone dark at all. And to my mind, that could mean an animal had just eaten it only within an hour of when we walked past. And we heard that noise that could have been a bonobo, but people were talking at the time and it was hard to tell. So it's possible that was an animal that we heard, that it walked through on the ground, pulling Bokombe as it went. And it's still very close to us here somewhere.
But with the light fading, they're forced to return to the village. Next morning, their hopes are raised again. They find some old sleeping nests in the canopy.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
5, and it's
plus
the ones there.
Yeah.
How old are these? This is that's old, and
That's old.
that's old, but that looks new.
A new nest is the most compelling evidence so far that bonobos are somewhere around.
Okay, got it. I got it. That's fairly new too.
Yeah. One old nest.
One old one, and the other
And the other
6?
Yeah, 6.
6 plus 1.
Yeah.
That's good. So potentially 9.
9, yeah.
We've got up to 9, which means there's 9 nests. Well, we have more than 9, but 9 were built on about the same day. So potentially it's a group of 9. So, oui.
They decide to go home and then stake out this area early the next day. The following morning, before dawn, they trace back to where they found the group of nests.
Right here.
A part of the nest. This one's up. Pardon. Up here, straight through there. So it's nest. I got it. Got it. There, let's see. Oh, that's incredible. Come back here. Look. Oh, that's incredible. Oh, it's fantastic. Just fantastic. See how they're not reacting to us? They know we're here. They're looking down. They're not worried. Oh, that's wonderful. Really wonderful. Oh, it's fantastic.
But there's even better news.
More coming here. It's really exciting. There's a female with an infant up here, a little baby.
The bonobos have survived and they're thriving.
I thought it was a very good chance there would just be no bonobos here at all. And it was basically thinking of it as the end of an era, end of possibility of understanding them anymore, that it would just be one of those puzzles that people would never really work out in terms of, you know, what was really going on with bonobos, but because they'd be gone, and it would be really, really sad. And it was so great to come here and to see them. And not only to see them, but to find females with infants, and we saw a pregnant female, And it's clearly that the groups are doing great, and they're reproducing and they're having babies.
Francis's study site has fared better than some. 3/4 of the bonobos around the Japanese site were hunted out during the war. Over the whole country, there may be less than 15,000 left. But a picture has slowly been emerging of how some animals may have survived the slaughter. Some may have used their traditional feeding areas only when it was safe. In the evenings, they retreated back into deeper, safer parts of the forest. That's why the forests appeared so empty. In some areas, bonobos started making nests on the ground, and others muted their calls to draw less attention to themselves. Bonobos are smart primates. They've proved themselves capable of change. Their existence in the wild remains precarious. But even while they've been missing, we've been finding out more about them. Recent developments in genetics suggest we might have more in common with bonobos than we ever thought.
They have found that a particular piece of DNA that is involved in affiliation and bonding is present in humans. It's present in bonobos, but it's absent in the chimpanzee. And so we share a particular gene, or whatever we call it, a particular piece of DNA with the bonobo that the chimp doesn't have, which may indicate that some of our social behavior is more similar to the last common ancestor, and that we share that with the bonobo.
Bonobos may reveal further surprises, but only if people stop hunting them. For now, Jeff Dupin has put his bonobo research on hold. Instead, he's trying to encourage local people to reduce their dependency on bushmeat.
One of the main reasons why people are focusing more and more on bushmeat in this area for trade and for self-consumption is the fact that they have no alternatives. So by reactivating agriculture, we hope, one, to increase supply of subsistence crops, two, increase livelihood of families so that they don't have to get into the forest again to pay some basic needs.
But conflict in the Congo could flare up at any time. Without long-term security, the jungles will remain a place to hunt animals rather than to study them. But if we can protect the bonobo and re-establish long-term research, who knows what revelations they'll offer. The bonobo's world is a kind of time machine, an important rear window on how we might have evolved. Laid-back bonobos are just as relevant to our evolution as excitable chimps. Now that they've managed to survive the war, we have the chance to discover more about our peace-loving cousins, and possibly find out more about ourselves.